from the heart. Stories honest and true. The one, the only. The Human Canvas You. Hello and welcome to The Human Canvas, the podcast where we explore our unique lived experiences, exploring the lives of people from all walks, diving into their unique journeys, their challenges, their passions, and the moments that have shaped who they are today. I'm your host, Nicholas Graham Hall, and today I'm honored to welcome to the podcast founder, owner, and farmer, Chris Baggott. Hey, Chris, good to see you today.
Hi, Nicholas. Thanks for having me on. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. And we want to talk about food as medicine, something that is becoming more of an interest for myself, and in having a conversation with one of my friends, and she and I were talking about it, and she just said, "You have to talk to Chris. He's got a story that you're going to want to hear about." And so I've done very little preparation. No questions, no topics in advance. I know, just wanting to learn more about your particular experience and how food, when food became medicine, or just your journey.
Okay, sure. And just open-ended like that, we'll go.
Absolutely open-ended, yeah.
Um, so my deep background is in technology. I was very, very fortunate to be a co-founder of ExactTarget, which we were able to take public in 2012. And then we sold to Salesforce, were acquired by Salesforce in 2013. So great ride, 15-year overnight success.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and by the way, congratulations. I lived in Silicon Valley. I had a startup that failed, and I was left with, credit card debt and angel investors that were a little sad. So I know I'm more of the typical experience.
well, trust me, I was 100% bankrupt, like, going into the judge, before we started ExactTarget. So been on both sides of the startup world. The same year we were acquired by Salesforce, I had another startup called Compendium Software, and we were acquired by Oracle. So it's kind of fun that, the two biggest players in cloud marketing solutions.
Yeah, I was like, so where no Microsoft acquisition,
No
no.
Microsoft yet. No, no.
Okay.
So,
Working on that one.
um, so, my wife and I have been sitting around and, kind of responsibility of what are we going to do now with this great fortune, this great opportunity we have to do good,
Yeah.
and support nonprofits, the United Way. And we had read The Omnivore's Dilemma back in about 2006. I'm actually rereading it right now, and we got very, very interested in the whole agricultural problem, starting with soil health and the environment and ground pollution, water pollution, the meanness of the industrial agriculture system on farmers, and obviously human health.
Yeah.
So we decided, okay, we're going to invest in farms. We're going to become farmers. And we started with 75 acres in 2010. And from there, we grew over the next pushing 16 years now. I guess it is 16 years. We're now up to 6 farm properties and about 900 acres. And basically, we convert that corn and soybean land that's basically denuded of all life,
Yeah.
and we make it into a healthy grassland. And the way we do that is by aggressively managing ruminant animals, cattle, and we also do chickens. And and we've done a really good job there. The land is amazing. The biodiversity is amazing. The plant biodiversity, the insects, the birds. It's really incredible. We finance all that by selling meat directly to the consumer. So our farm business is called Tyner Pond Farm, and People buy from us online. They go to tynerpondfarm.com and they order, and we deliver. We don't ship. We only serve the central Indiana community. And that was great. And it's going great. My
Can you
son,
tell what's the first, it's, say the name again a little bit more slowly. I want to make sure.
sure. Our farm is called Tyner Pond Farm.
Tyner, is that, how do you spell Tyner?
Tyner,
Okay.
Tyner, Tyner,
Okay.
pondfarm.com.
Got it.
And
Okay.
Tyners were the first settlers of Hancock County where we are. And they had a
Okay.
large farm and they had the first store in our county back in like 1821. So that is kind of how we got started. It's interesting that we started, my son was I think he was a senior or a junior in high school. No way he was going to be a farmer. Went off to college in Portland, wound up in Evergreen in Washington, and working on a regenerative farm like ours, and
Wow.
decided he wanted to come home and make a career out of being a farmer. So in 15 years, we are a second generation farm, which is really interesting because he is now a full-time farmer and basically running our farm operations.
Did you ever imagine? So what was it that got you curious ab about it originally? I mean, was it something personally? Was it, family in
It
with
was
farming?
more, what got us interested really was from an environmental standpoint and learning about the food system. I don't know if you've read The Omnivore's Dilemma. Michael
Mhm.
Pollan is one of my favorite authors. It's a fantastic book. As I said, I literally just started reading it again 20 years later. Um, Everything's gotten worse, but he kind of goes deep into corn and the whole corn economy and where corn shows up in ultra processed foods and seed oils and way before anybody was talking about this. And kind of his, lots of the book is about what's wrong. And he finds this farmer in Virginia named Joel Salatin who's doing it right. And that sort of led me down a rabbit hole of Joel Salatin, right? And turns out Joel had written at the time like 6 books, and he now has probably written 16 books. Um, but I started reading all about raising chickens on pasture and how to raise cattle on pasture and everything from the rotational grazing to water systems, and just became really, really fascinated with it. In our area out here, we are kind of the edge of Indianapolis, if you will, in Greenfield. It's still a rural town, but I can still, I worked in the circle for 22 years. I
Yeah.
could beat anyone from anywhere in other suburbs to work every day. But we still had this sort of small town feel. And if you go east of us, it's still farmland.
Yeah.
And one day this farm came up for sale, and I drove by it and drove by it and drove by it. And as I said, we were kind of having this, um, I don't want to say moral discussion, but really, my wife and I think a lot about this, and we know how lucky we are. And it's, how do we put this windfall, for lack of a better word, to the best use for society?
Mm.
And after reading The Omnivore's Dilemma and reading kind of the how-tos of Joel Salatin, that's what we decided to do. We would save soil and save soil biology. We met Alan Savory. I don't know if you're familiar with Alan Savory or not. Alan is kind of the founder of holistic management. And he runs a ranch in Zimbabwe. Alan is a white 94-year-old now, Rhodesian. And he had given a TED talk in 2013. That's amazing. And we have been there. I've been there 3 times. My wife has been there 4 times. And he is in the middle of a desert in Zimbabwe in about 2,000 hectares of just this rectangle of grass and water, right? And all of that through managing ruminant animals grazing the ground properly, right? The whole thing is that soil, grasslands, and ruminant animals evolved holistically. They all go together. And when you take one component away, the whole system falls apart. And then compound that with chemicals. Um, I'm working on a reel right now of, take a tablespoon of our soil. There's more than 1 billion life forms in that. Take a tablespoon from a cornfield, there is none, right? They have taken these whatever 100 million years of biology and turned
Yeah.
it into NPK. So that became our mission, this idea of soil health. And Alan says in holistic management, you want to have sort of a core context, like what are you doing? Every decision you make leads you back to this one thing, right? So any decision, what should I do? Should I give a cow antibiotics? Well, let's see. If I give a cow antibiotics because it's sick, couple questions to ask. First of all, what happens to antibiotics? Well, 80% of them are expelled through their urine and manure, wherever they're dropping their manure. If we're in the pasture, they're dropping 80% of their antibiotics into the pasture. What happens to my soil biology, which is my core context? Well, of course, antibiotics kill biology. So therefore, even if an animal's sick, I cannot give it an antibiotic because my context is the soil health, if that makes sense. Then the second thing is this whole concept of reductionist, right? In the United States, we're not holistic, we're reductionist. I have a problem, solve it with this tool, right? An
Right.
antibiotic. Instead of saying holistically, how in the world did this animal get sick in the first place? And what am I doing wrong in my management that is leading to this unhealthy animal, right? And eventually you lead back to why, and figure out what you're doing wrong that made this animal get sick. It didn't get sick by itself. It got sick because of its environment. So yeah, so
All right,
that's the
Chris,
genesis.
you're asking, by the way, that just that context. I mean, apply that to all of life. Apply that to,
100%. I mean,
right? I mean, why do we have all
anytime
these
you reach
people?
for a tool, you
Yeah,
need to, especially as support, you need to ask yourself why, right?
yeah,
Because that I'm not vitamin B12 pills, right? A supplement. Okay, why, right? That's a reductionist thing. Well, I'm taking it because I don't have enough B12. Well, why don't you have enough B12? Well, back. Turns out because you're eating a bad diet, right? If you eat this kind of food and stop eating that kind of food, you won't need to take these medications. And, we'll get into that a lot later. I don't know if you've seen, I just published, my third year in a row of about 25 different blood markers for me, starting in 2024, 2025, and 2026, where I radically changed my diet. And these are how my numbers have improved, so it's hugely transparent. Risky for me because a number might go sideways or wrong. So far, it hasn't, but you know, um,
what?
that's kind of the thing. So anyway, go ahead, ask a question. Sorry.
Yeah, I was curious with so you drove past the farm a number of times and you got you know most of us, many people will get curious about something. We'll get interested, maybe we'll read a book, maybe, but there are these times along the path where like, you just lose interest, or it's like, oh, this is way more than I bargained for. Um, I'm curious, along this path, like, have you bumped up against those unknowns that were much more than you anticipated, and just kind of
Oh,
curious how you
well,
continue
but
to
I think you probably share the same brain type. I'm entrepreneurial and I'm risk taking, and I jump into things before I know much about them. My wife used to say, it's not really good to be a first generation animal on one of Chris's farms, because we made a lot of mistakes and we continue to make a lot of mistakes. But it's very exciting because this is such a frontier. Just like the internet was in 2000 when we started ExactTarget, right? Customers are, I'd be talking to people and they're like, wait, Chris, you're telling me My customers are going to have email addresses and they're going to want to hear from me using those emails. Yes, that's exactly what's going to happen, and it took a long time. We were in the
Right.
wilderness, for several years.
Yeah.
Compendium was all about content marketing and, we were, competing against bloggers back when people thought blogging was the thing and blogging was about thought leadership and
Right.
no, it's about SEO, and we had a lot of haters and a lot of mistakes were made and I think about the AI world now and Compendium and I'm like, man, if I still had Compendium or if I had AI when I had Compendium, it'd be incredible. But farming is the same way and food is the same way. We have this tool now called the internet that I can sell directly to a consumer.
Right.
And as more and more groceries move online, um, I don't need Kroger to curate my food for me anymore. The fact is, I think it's kind of idiotic to even go to a store, right? Like they've fooled you into doing all their work for you. I did this TED talk a few years ago, and the whole premise was, imagine your grandchild sitting on your lap and tell me again about the old days. You did what? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had to drive a car I owned to a place that probably took me 15 minutes to get there. Then I had to park it and walk across a parking lot, 3 acres in all kinds of weather, storms and sleet. And then I had to get an actual cart. Like, again, my grandchildren are not going to know what this thing is, this cart. Then I have to walk up and down these aisles, hoping that they have inventoried the product I want, right? I don't know. I have to take it and put it into the cart. Then at the end, I go to a checkout line, not just hit a button. No, I have to go to a line. I have to take it back out of the cart, put it on a belt, and then it goes through the belt. And then I have to take it back off the belt and put it back in the cart. Then I take it out of the cart. Then I walk across 3 acres, and then I have to take it out of the cart and put it in my car. Then I have to drive home again. Then I have to take it out of the car and put it in my house. It was like, wait, Grandpa, you touched this like 9 times. Like, what kind of moron are you? What's wrong with you people, right? I mean, the whole thing sounds silly.
Yeah.
Um, but the other thing that happens is I don't need the grocery store curating my food anymore, right? I can choose to buy my toilet paper and have it delivered for free with Walmart or Amazon. And I can choose to buy my produce from my local farm right down the street here called Berry Goods Farm or Fair Farms or Shanty Farms. I have 3 farms growing amazing greens right around me. Um, and I can buy my meat from Tyner Pond Farm. Um, it's a lot like the music industry. You're a much younger man than me, but there was a time that if you wanted a song, you had to hear it on the radio, right? If it wasn't
Yeah.
curated by the radio station, that song
Right.
didn't exist.
Right.
Then you had to go to a store. That store had a capacity on average. Actually, the big stores could carry about 5,000 songs, right? So there were very few professional musicians and there were very few songs. Now there are 5 million songs, right? Now I have this unlimited choice.
Oh, Chris, there's way more than 5 million.
Yeah. But the
Yeah.
other thing that's empowered are all the musicians, right? I'm sure you're familiar with the whole theory of the long tail, right? The music industry is way out on the long tail now. And you also have all of these musicians. The math is if you can have 10,000 fans, that is a $100,000 a year music business, right? So imagine, and then you have your Luke Bryant's, right? Kid who just came out of the Navy, sitting in the bottom of an aircraft carrier playing guitars for his friends, post a YouTube video, and now he's filling stadiums, right? Um, and that's the opportunity we have in the small food business, right? We don't need the government to do anything except leave us alone. That industry is going to self-destruct on its own. And, you know, we have the tools now that we can go direct to the consumer. And if the consumer cares about the things we care about, then they can buy from us.
What's been what was you talked about sharing your blood markers? Was there a particular, was that just taking food for yourself to the next level? Was there
Yeah.
something?
So the context is, as I said, it was soil health.
Yeah.
And then that becomes why, right? Again, deeper holistic. And eventually it's because I want healthy animals. Well, why? Because I want to have healthy meat. Why? Because I want to have healthy people, right?
Yeah.
And so that became our context over the last 15 years of this is about human health, right? Every decision we make is about human health. So I had cancer a few years ago. I finished my 5 year window was over in 2024, and I just turned 64. And so I was thinking about longevity. I read the book Outlive, dug into a lot of stuff about Dr. Tim Noakes, and just started really getting interested in keto. I had read this book called Endure, which fascinating book all about um, it, endurance athletes and how much is mental to run 100 miles and how much is physical. And he kept referring to this Dr. Tim Noakes, which I dug into him and just learned a lot about keto diets. And so in August of 2024, I said, great, I'm going to go on a keto diet. I'm even though I make all this meat, I was still eating pasta every day, and
Yeah.
normal, like the balanced diet kind of thing. So I went all keto. I gave up all seed oils. I gave up all ultra processed foods, of course, and I wanted to see what happens. And it was amazing. I dropped 35 pounds. I was maybe 195 for a 5'10", 64-year-old man. That's pretty normal in the United States. I was probably, I got lots of friends my size that are a little over 200 that
Yeah.
still like feel like they're fit and healthy.
Right.
But then I ran through these, about 25 markers, C-reactive protein, APOBs, your lipids, your metabolic tests, um, and and some were fine, some were whacked. So that was August of 2024. I did it again in February of 2025 after I've been on keto since August, and everything got amazingly better. One of the things if I can be proud of my little
Yeah.
body, um, but I also treat my body like a client, right? I do, I think of it outside of myself.
Yeah.
What am I feeding? I used to call it feeding the dog. People feed their dog more thoughtfully than they feed their kids a lot, right?
Yeah.
What am I feeding the dog today, and how is this going to affect it? And having these blood tests, which are ridiculously cheap, I could see like my C-reactive protein went from like a 1.7 something down to like a 0.43. Um, um, C-reactive protein is a marker of inflammation, right? Chronic disease is caused by inflammation, right? How badly are you torturing your body?
Yeah.
In the book Outlive, um, he talks about the four horsemen, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. And basically, I believe that those are all metabolic diseases that need to be addressed. Like planting a tree. When's the best time to plant a tree? 40 years ago. When's the
Right.
next best time today? So unfortunately, I waited till I was 64, but everything got better. And then I just did the whole thing again in 2025, including getting a cardiac scan in a CT machine. And again, everything is just getting better and better and better, and that's my super current passion right now is like, why isn't everyone eating keto? I don't understand it now. I know it because we're being told, oh, cholesterol, my cholesterol has gone up. My cholesterol's up. My triglycerides are, what would look dangerous. My doctors, used to tell me in 2024, I need to put you on a statin, I need to put you on a B12. I need to put, as a normal 65-year-old, the normal 65-year-old in the United States is on 5 full-time medications. I'm on none. And my doctor has recommended 3 prior to this. I collaborate with him. I tell him what tests I want. He orders them. I get them. I know what results I'm looking for and what they mean. And then I go and sit with him and say once a year and say, anything here you disagree with? And the answer is no. You know,
Well, I think your point, I mean, you're pointing to one thing that is always I've always been curious about, is we have these guidelines for cholesterol, blood pressure, all, and I'm like, but we're not, I mean, we're not robots.
Right.
We're not
We're
all
not
this,
we're
we're
not
not the thing.
homogeneous, right?
Not at all.
And
It's,
again, I think that's the breakthrough. A lot of things that didn't exist 10 years ago, right? The internet was not as sophisticated enough for a Tyner Pond Farm to run a successful business with many employees, saving land and selling meat online to a local community. I mean, we go as far as Bloomington, we go as far as West Lafayette, east, west about, and we deliver, like we bring it to you. We don't put it into the mail stream, we bring it to you. We go about 70 miles. So Columbus, Indiana, obviously Indy and all the suburbs around that. That wasn't possible really 10 years ago. But these blood tests, you couldn't really do this that way, right? But now I can go online. I don't have to even go through my doctor. I can go to Quest Diagnostics, which has an office right here in Greenfield, walk in there with a list and say, I want these. They will take my blood and give me those results. So I can manage my own health now a lot better than I could before. Um, and I can have a conversation with my physician if I choose to,
yeah.
about it with real data to say, this is what's happening. And yes, if you look at only, my LDL, but are these large molecule LDL or small molecule LDL, right? And how does it relate to my insulin resistance number, which is a ratio of your HDL and your triglycerides, right? And again, AI is a boon to this. AI has all the knowledge in the world. Find me a paper that supports high LDL and low APOB that says I don't need to take a statin, right? And boom, in less than a second, you have all the research that was ever written on a topic, and you can make your own decisions. That was very hard to do even 2 years ago.
It's definitely quite a cash cow.
What's that?
The statins and I mean,
Oh, yeah, $400 billion a year, and there's
yeah,
no evidence it does any good. It lowers your cholesterol, but overall mortality is worse. It's like, wait, okay, you know, I mean, I'm not going to make any statements. I can only say what works for me and for
for you.
everybody
I think that's,
to
yeah, I think
understand
that's important.
you can draw your own conclusions because you can get your own data. And switching to a keto diet for 60 days is not going to kill you, but it could dramatically change your life in the positive. And that's what happened to me. But, you know, if at the end of the day, you look at your blood 60 days later for $200 and say, ooh, this is worse. I'm not doing it anymore. Great. No harm, no foul.
Yeah.
But if it's like me and it gets ridiculously better,
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier when we were first talking, I was in Bloomington this week and ran this 15K. In December of last year, I did a 50K ultramarathon. I was in Colorado this winter for a couple of weeks, and I did a 21K cross country ski race at 9,000 feet.
I was going to ask you what altitude.
It was 9,500 feet. It was, and I did it. I didn't win. Like I got beat by a 75-year-old guy who beat me by 90 minutes. But for a guy from Indiana going to Colorado, acclimating for about 10 days, and not losing and being able to compete, I finished under 3 hours, which was my goal. Like none of that would have happened to me before this.
Yeah.
I thought about it when I was 60, like, oh, I'm going to try and run again. And my hips hurt, and my knees hurt. And I was like, okay, my running days are over. I switched to keto. I started walking. Then I started rucking. I rucked for probably a year. I didn't actually attempt to even run from, when I started my eating on keto and my rucking in August of 24. I don't think I ran until November of 25. And first week of December, I ran 50K in the
Wow.
woods, in the mud, in the cold. It was horrible, but it was great. I did it. Finished third in my age group.
Nice. That's awesome. Now, okay, I with that
You
going,
wanted passion.
you go from the walking to the rucking to the running. Any is there anything because I'm not as young as you think I am, is there anything that you're having just to manage physically with the
Not at all.
physical?
Not one bit. It's ridiculous. I mean, no one is more surprised than me. I thought I was done running. I had run, in my early 30s. I did the mini marathon in India a couple times, and that was sort of the peak of my running, which was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, I gave it a shot because I was looking at ultra running, and it looked like it was kind of fun. And there's a lot of old guys doing it, right? It seemed like a good sport for someone my age. Um, Failed miserably. I just couldn't run. Like, I'd run a mile and my knees hurt, my ankles hurt, my hips hurt. I have tons of friends my age, not tons, but several already getting knee replacements, hip replacements. Um, I didn't want to do that. I thought, okay, I'm done running. So I just started walking. And then I heard about rucking, which is basically walking with a weighted backpack. And so, I walked for a couple months and then I got a ruck and just maybe 10 pounds, 20 pounds. Now I'm doing 35 pounds, and just started walking and books on tape or podcasts. And, I read probably 20 books that year.
I
And,
did,
but I really built this base. My advice to people who I talk to about this and I want to run too. Well, I didn't start off running. I built this incredible base of strength and stability, A, with the diet, and B, with the rucking. And then from rucking, I had heard about this technique called run, walk, run, where basically it's like an interval. You walk for 30 seconds and you run for 30 seconds and walk for 30 seconds. And then once you accomplish that, you move up to 90-second runs and then 2-minute runs. And so I started doing that. And the running just felt so good that I gave up the walking part and just started running. And, I run 5, 6 miles almost every single day. I run 10 plus miles once a week at least.
wow.
And, like I said, I'm doing trying to do, every 2 weeks, some kind of event. Um, I want to get faster now because I'm really slow, but I can go far. And
All right, well, my interest is peaked because I'm
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 telling you,
I'm sort of like, oh, I want to, I'd like to be able to play basketball again. There's things I'd like to be able to.
yeah,
It's just like, oh, the aches and the pains. So
exactly. And it's gone. I mean, I ran in the mountainous terrain of it was the backside of Lake Minot. It's a state, it's not Brown County State Park, but it's another began with a P. I can't remember what it was. But it was steep and it was rugged and people were dropping out. And I did that 15K in a very good time for me. Next day I ran 6 miles for
wow.
fun. I wasn't like in bed, like, oh, I got to recover for 2 days.
One of those,
Nothing hurt.
I remember.
Nothing hurts. And I think that's all the collagen. And, I drink bone broth every day and that I make it from my own bones from Tyner Pond.
Not your bones, from the animal's
Yeah,
bones.
yes, exactly. Yeah. Bones I control, but
Right.
not inside me, external
Right.
bones. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, nobody's more surprised than me. And that's why I feel like this evangelist that like I've just discovered
Yeah.
this secret. But I read The Big Fat Surprise 10 years ago, Nina Nolitz's book, where she kind of goes through why do we think that saturated fat is bad for us? And, she traces it all the way back. I don't, are you familiar with this?
I'm familiar with the concept, not specifically the book, but
She basically goes through and, where did this begin, right? Well, the American Heart Association was founded by Procter and Gamble to sell more Crisco, right? They invented this cottonseed oil stuff that was being used as a lubricant. It looked like lard. Hey, I wonder if we could package it as lard. So she goes all the way back there. But the really turning point was Eisenhower had a heart attack. And his doctor was this doctor named Ansel Keys. And he was a very famous doctor. I think he invented the K ration in World War II. But Ansel Keys um, decided I'm going to find out what causes heart disease. And he came up with this thing called the 7 continents or the 7 countries study. And in the 7 countries study, he looked for these people who were healthy and what did they eat. And basically narrowed down on saturated fat. They eat less saturated fat. Um, Now, consider the time
Yeah.
we'd already had saturated fat being replaced by Crisco. So the pace of saturated fat consumption was going way down. Margarine had been invented. Um, Seed oils had been going up, but everybody smoked, right?
Right.
Everybody smoked. Like our Eisenhower was like a 2 or 3 or 4 pack a day, Lucky Straights, no filter, oh yeah, it was a steak that killed him. Um, but anyway, 20 years later, people look at this study. Well, it turns out he studied 21 countries and he left off the countries that ate more saturated fat. Germans, right? Healthiest people in the world, ate a lot of saturated fat. So we'll just forget them. So he selected his data to support his hypothesis. So what she does in the book is she kind of starts there and goes through the Framingham Heart study and all these other studies that basically revert to the core study, which is horribly flawed.
Yeah.
And that's how this whole thing, I just got my blood work back, through IU Health and looks at my cholesterol. You click on cholesterol and it's like, cholesterol is blah 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 and it'll cause your plaque, your heart rate, to clog and you'll have heart attacks. And it's like all of that's been debunked. Like none of that is true. But even major institutions like IU Health, still
Right.
promote that. And again, I don't know. I only know what's working for me. My heart has gotten
Yeah.
better. I had this cardiac scan, and I'm 65 years old, abused myself pretty hard up until 18 months ago. And, I'm a 9 out of 400 of cardiac plaque, right? My APOB is like an 89, right? So my LDLs are high, but APOB, which is actually the particles of, flowing around your blood, is extremely low or on the low edge of what's good. And, for a 65-year-old man, it's great. Uh,
Well, I think what you're pointing to is the opportunity that an individual has, hopefully in the future and not too distant future, could have the opportunity to begin to think about their overall well-being as it relates to them, to their particular makeup,
I mean,
right?
now that I'm in ketosis, I do a finger stick every day. I have a little just thing I got on Amazon for $40 for my glucose and my ketones, right? So it gives me a number, two numbers every day. So one of the taboos of keto diets are beans, dried beans, high carbs, right? So, I was like, I like dried beans, and the fiber is good. And so I started a week ago. Maybe it was Wednesday, quarter cup. And the next morning I can wake up and take my blood and say, what did that do to me? Nothing. It was fine. Next time, a couple days later, I did a half a cup. What did that do to me? Nothing. Fine. Okay. Next day, I did a full cup. Boom, I'm out of ketosis and my glucose spiked. So I'm like, all right, I know my safe level, my Chris Baggott safe level is a
Yeah.
half a cup. I mean, that's amazing, right? I can dial in, and anyone can do this, right? Dial in your food directly to your metabolism and see how it affects it. And when you start seeing things negatively affect it, stop doing it. You say you have a sweet tooth, right? But, if you care
In
about
fact,
metabolic, huh?
as I say in one of my, I'm a songwriter, and in one of my songs it says I have a bit of a sweet tooth. In fact, more than one.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Well, once you, and it's probably when you're 65 and you're like literally staring at death, um, you know, maybe this matters more, but, it's easy for me not to have a cookie. It's not even tempting, not even remotely on my radar. I mean, we have cookies in our house all the time. My wife bakes, but it doesn't even remotely tempt me because A, my palate has been trained now after a year and a half of
Well, I
keto.
That's
That
what I think you're pointing to. Your palate has been trained.
unbelievably so.
I mean, you can't go to a gathering, to any parade without candy just being literally just
Yeah.
thrown on the streets for kids to go and pick up. So
Yeah. It's horrifying. I see that
it's
and I'm
really,
horrified.
yeah.
Like I'm just like, what are you doing to your children? Like, which I
Every
was
birth,
doing the same thing when I had kids, so I'm a hypocrite, but um, I go to the beach. I mean, I was looking at some video the other day and just all these people, or even these races. I go to these races and I see people who I'm passing who I know are better athletes, but they've got this roll around their stomach, and I just want to be like, if you ate keto, you would destroy me in this race, right? Because I know you're faster than me underneath all that, but
yeah.
they're still living the carb life, the body doesn't need carbohydrates. That's the science of it. That you have to eat protein, you have to eat fat, but you don't have to eat carbohydrates. You could live on eating zero carbohydrates. Um, that's not me. That's a fact.
Mhm.
Um, so why did the government in 1977 come up with the food pyramid and make carbohydrates the primary driver, right? Probably money. Sounds cynical, but you know,
It's usually, yeah, it's amazing how it affects, how it grabs people's attention. That's what I often think about. It's and the amount of mind energy and the amount of how it just magnetizes people's attention, and then what they end up spending their time thinking about and worrying about, and versus being more open and curious, which is what you're pointing to with the soil health. It's being able to ask why. That does take time. That
right.
does take, it does take the
It takes a
ability.
curiosity, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're not curious, that's why you're eating a McDonald's, right? Like, and and the soil health matters to all of this. Like, I do not think I would be as successful if I was buying grass-fed beef from a grocery store, because I know where that comes from too, and I know how it's raised. 85% of grass-fed beef in the United States basically comes from Australia, fed in feedlots, just like our feedlots, except they're feeding them alfalfa pellets. Alfalfa pellets, where do they come from? Well, they come from Nevada, and they're raised in Arizona, and they're raised on irrigation water from the Colorado River, right? So you got this dwindling resource of water in the West that is flooding fields and irrigating alfalfa that we're shipping to Australia to feedlot feed grass fed beef because alfalfa is grass. And then they ship it back to us and sell it cheap in Whole Foods. And people think, oh, I'm good, and this is good. But the nutrient density matters. What we also have to work hard on is the idea that the food is not a commodity, right? Like there are tremendous differences in how it's raised. And what we're doing at Tyner Pond is we are raising the most nutrient dense food on the planet. There may be people who are doing as good as we are, not many, but we are in the absolute top tier. So, you can't switch to keto and go to Kroger and start buying steaks and think you're going to be okay. You need those nutrients. These GLP-1s has become a really good, interesting market for us because nutrition matters so much more to those people, right? That you're on this thing, you're being forced to eat less, but you have to eat better.
Yeah.
You have to, right? Or you see the symptoms that people are reporting them all the time. But that's
I
been
wish,
really,
I
really
wish,
helpful for our business.
I wish there was a way. We train people to be consumers, and so they go to the store, and we're trained to what's on sale. I mean, it's all about the dollars and cents,
Right.
but we're not effectively able to really communicate like what's the value of this carrot on a scale of 1 to 10.
You should
And
start with omnivore's dilemma, right? Because, you know, this has all been a manipulation, right? And it is all about money.
yeah,
And nobody makes money on broccoli except a couple of California, you know, Central Valley, again, irrigated with Colorado River water, unsustainable. The system of the grocery store, the food industry is designed to serve that, right? The food industry is designed to make you eat more, right? We have a finite population. Like, we're not having as many babies as we used to. We're not having
right.
immigration.
So
So
we literally have to consume more
if
in
I'm a
order to
publicly
keep.
traded company, I got to grow 20% a year. How am I going to do that? I got to trick you into eating more, right? And
I
that means, there's a whole thing called the bliss point, right? And food scientists, that's what they talk about. What is the perfect combination of sweet and salty and texture? Great book called Ultra Processed Food, which really opened my eyes just to the whole concept of texture. You eat our beef, you have to chew it, right? There's life there, but the criteria is cheap and tender. Oh, it's not tender enough. Well, you know what they're selling you? They're selling you something you can masticate very, very quickly and swallow so you eat more. I can go to St. Elmo's and polish off a 16-ounce porterhouse, right? Because it's tender. It's just, I'm barely even chewing it,
yeah,
cutting it small pieces and just it goes down. I can't eat a 16-ounce Tyner Pond steak. I can eat 6 to 8 ounces because it's so much more substantial.
mm,
There's a whole obesity theory about starvation, starvation obesity, right? Which is an oxymoron, but the idea is your body is so screaming for nutrients all the time because your food has no nutrition, even if you're eating vegetables, right? If you're going to the grocery store buying vegetables, that is a vapid broccoli looking thing, right? It's got fiber, but doesn't have any vitamins, right? It's got none of the nutrition that buying from your next door neighbor, might have. Um, and so these people are just so hungry all the time. And of course, the food is designed to make you hungry.
yeah,
Passes through, you barely taste it, and you crave, right? That's their bliss point, right? We need this food to be, no one can eat just one. And, Omnivore's Dilemma. I'm just reading this section now. He goes through the whole part about, supersizing it. And, Ray Kroc used to fight that and be like, no, no, no. If they want more French fries, they can just buy another package. But people felt gluttonous buying another package. But if they doubled the size of the package, they could trick people into eating double the amount of French fries, right? I mean, it's
yeah,
once you look at it, you can't unsee it.
right. Once you've seen the unseen, there's no turning back. It's
Yeah.
another line of one of my songs. It's like
Yeah.
sometimes like, oh, I wish I didn't see that, but I'm grateful that I saw it. But it's like, oh, can't go
Well, and
back.
again, the beauty is, again, we get back to the internet. You're not a victim of this, right? You can go to your phone and type in local grass fed beef, and somebody like me, and there's probably going to be 5 or 6 that you're shocked to find out.
Now that I know you delivered to Bloomington, I don't have to search.
Okay, well, thank you. But there are more of us. This is consumer driven. Have you ever read any Clayton Christensen, like the or not the omnivores, the Innovator's Dilemma? Um, Famous Harvard person. He just recently passed away. Big mentor to us at ExactTarget. But um, um, he wrote this book back in the probably mid 90s called The Innovator's Dilemma. And essentially, his premise is that big has a much harder time innovating than small. And disruption always comes from the bottom, right? It cannot be top down, usually because they have too much vested interest in the status quo. They can't disrupt themselves, especially publicly traded companies, right? You go out and say, I know we made cars last week, but now we're going to fly space shuttles. The stock market will crush you. So,
Right.
that gives Starlink or whatever Elon Musk's thing is, SpaceX, the opportunity to disrupt, right? And he's done that. He completely disrupted the electric car business, completely disrupted the space business because these big entities can't pivot. Food is the same way, right? We are disrupting from the bottom. I don't care what Kraft does. I don't care what government subsidies do. It doesn't matter as long as I can reach one more customer a day
Yeah.
to switch to our farm, right? And that momentum, when we started 15 years ago, which wasn't very long ago, we were we were alone. Um, Now there's half a dozen farms just in the Indianapolis area that are making a living farming and not corn and soybeans. And I have corn and soybeans people calling me frequently. How can I pivot out of this, right? Because they're not making money.
Right.
Monsanto or Bayer and the chemical companies and the fertilizer companies, they all make money, but farmers don't get any money. That government check that the president says we're going to bail out the farmers for $12 billion. That farmer's just passing that from one hand to their input companies. So that goes to the
Yeah, I know.
fertilizer company and the seed company and they don't keep that.
I know when I was out in Silicon Valley, the venture capitalists would say, you want to build something where you're selling the picks to the gold diggers. You
Right.
don't want to be digging. You don't want to be the one digging for gold. You want serve all the people that are going to try and dig for gold. And I think about that from these large factory farms. It's the platform. It's like you said, it's the chemical companies, it's the big companies that are essentially enabling this platform. And the farmers are the ones that are, trying to dig for gold, but they're just trying to stay alive. Right.
Right, exactly. And that that person running a CAFO, the corporation owns the animals, the corporation owns the food. You're basically just feeding them.
Yeah.
And they can change their mind any day. And they can change their mind about how much they pay you. And they can change their mind to say, I know you just spent $350,000 to build this chicken house 5 years ago, um, but we're going to go to this more modern chicken house that somebody else just built for $700,000. Sorry. We
Yeah.
work with a dairy in Milroy, organic, grass-fed dairy that was on Organic Valley, right? Like, this is good, isn't it? Well, there's 60 cow, Jersey, small farm in Milroy. And literally one day, Organic Valley called them up and said, next week is our last week. We're not coming. So this is an entire business based on Organic Valley feeding their family. Um, but it's more efficient for them to go to a larger industrial dairy that happens to feed organic feed.
Right.
Even the cattle's lives are tortured.
I know. I'm always like I'm looking at the all the marketing on the packaging. And it's like, I think they're kind of telling us some things in ways that sound good and make us feel okay. But I think oftentimes it's more marketing
If
than
it's in the grocery store, it's almost by definition unsustainable, right? It's too big.
Mm.
I went to a place one year, um, McFarling Foods. They were out of business. They're out of business now, but I'm talking to Len McFarling, the owner, and I'm like, we're raising these pasture-raised chickens, and McFarling supplies restaurants, competes with Cisco, and um and and he's like, well, how many chickens can you raise? I said, I think we can get up to 30,000 chickens. He said, come with me. Gave me the finger pull. We walked down these ramps, down these stairs, over to the loading dock. There's 3 trucks there. He says, I get 3 trucks every single day. Opens up the back, it's packed full of chicken. Each one of these trucks is 30,000 chickens. It's like, there's no way that you can support a grocery store ethically, right?
Right.
Um, you
So
know,
I guess so Chris, I mean,
so if
it's
it's I mean, look at what happened to the recent chicken scandal with pasture. I can't remember the brand. Everyone thought they were pastured. Look at these bright orange, well, it turns out they're not actually pastured and they're using chemicals, even if they're not chemicals, but like extra herbs, we're going to put tarragon in their feed so their yolks are orange. So it looks like they're on pasture. No, I'm sorry, I'd cut you off.
no, I'm just so I mean, you were able to some extent you were able to drive by and purchase this farm because of the success that you had had,
100%. Yeah.
right? And so I guess if we're looking at the the economics. Um, th at this point in time, does it kind of require people that have excess of capital that are able to put it towards, a farm? And I don't know if you consider yourself now mid-size at this, or is it still
We're
small?
a big small farm.
Big,
I would
small
say
farm.
we're a big small farm. No, you bring up a great point, right? Land access is a lot harder now. We paid $4,500 an acre in 2010 for our first 75 acres. The farm immediately next door to me has been for sale for about a year, and I think it will probably be more like you know 12,000 to $40,000 an acre, depending on what goes on it.
Yeah.
The real breakthrough here, and this is where I differ from a lot of people in my space, is to get these corn farmers who already have land. I have a corn farmer friend. His family owns 250 acres and he rents a couple thousand more, maybe. So he's very insecure because, along comes a
He
data
rents he
center.
rents them from someone else to
Right.
farm.
Most farmland in Indiana is rented, right? It's not owned by the farmer, it's rented by the farmer. Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
So this is a
Yeah.
multi-generational farm, 500 acres that, you know, nobody wanted to farm anymore. So the farmer decides to rent it out for cash rents, and then that gets distributed to the heirs who probably live in Carmel or, anywhere.
Right.
That's kind of the farming model. So, you're a farmer now growing corn, you got 250 acres, you're nervous because you can't make a living on corn in 250 acres, and you're nervous about what's going to happen to your rental land. Like, that's a lot of stress. Right? Farming
Yeah.
is the highest suicide rate of any industry in the country. So, to me, the future of this, it starts with the consumer. You have to buy from us, right? And then not just Tyner Pond, but us in general. And the
Yeah.
more of us you buy from, the more of us will show up. The more farmers who own land will convert to raising pastured pigs because that's what you want, or pastured chicken because that's what you want. You don't want corn. Like, none of us want corn. 60% goes to ethanol, which is useless. 40 some percent now goes to animal feed. The amount of animals on feed in the United States is at a 70-year low or something right now. So that business is shrinking. Exports are shrinking. We're trying to make up uses for corn because, the government wants it, Monsanto wants it. But at the end of the day, the consumer doesn't want it. The consumer wants that farm to be in grass, sequestering carbon, making the soil and the water healthier, and creating healthier food. But if the consumer doesn't buy, if it doesn't create demand for this kind of farming, these landowners will not convert.
Yeah. It's that simple.
It is that simple. But I mean, it is consumer driven.
And what's been the you say you do have farmers around you that are becoming interested
Yeah,
in.
and there's a lot we've partnered with. We do something called custom grazing, where someone will have ground, we'll be like, put that in grass. We will bring you calves and we'll pay you a daily rate to raise those calves for us until they're a certain weight. Then we bring them here and we finish them. And we probably have 1,300 acres of farmland that could be traditionally in corn and soybeans, but is now in grass, right? Because we've outgrown the ability of our own farms. We buy calves from a farm in outside of Lexington. 700 acres was in corn and soybeans. Now he is in what's called cow calf. And we are contracted and we buy all of his calves. They're beautiful genetics. They're all grass fed. They never get shots. So it's not just us now, right? It's these other. There are four of them like that. We process 5 hogs a week. We buy those locally from local people. And a lot of farmers raise hogs on, they call it Christmas money, right? Just, I want to make a couple $1,000s, few $1,000s a year. I'll farrow some hogs and sell them to Tyner Pond Farm. So this dairy, that dairy is, it's become an important part of our business because we now sell to them or sell for them.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, they were dead. Like they hooked up with a big company, thought they were golden. Big company bailed on them. Somebody told me about them, and we're like, yeah, we'll give it a try. And it's a spectacular A2. It's raw. Cheese, butter, milk. Not for animal or not for human consumption.
Right.
But whatever you do behind the closed doors of your house. Um, but anyway, I'm not saying we single-handedly saved them. They're starting to work with other farms like ours to
Yeah.
remarket. But it's a big chunk of change for them that gave them a lifeline in a new business model. But again, it's only because the consumer buys it. If people don't buy it, the farmer's not going to do it.
Right.
And so, a long-winded answer to answer your land
Oh,
access problem. There is lots of land, right? There is 14 million acres in Indiana in corn. What we need to do is cause them to pivot and enable them to pivot from corn to food. Um, but that doesn't happen if everybody doesn't start demanding that kind of food.
yeah. How do you how do you convince or at least raise the curiosity of the consumer that is that middle income managing managing their budget, looking at how much they can spend on groceries per week. Um, I can I can imagine for me, I'm thinking, well, the value of you got to believe us that the value of what you're eating here is so much more than what you're currently buying at the grocery store that your your overall basket's going to be it's going to look smaller, but
Right.
actually it's so much healthier, it's going to be so much more filling.
Right.
You're actually going to need less volume.
Right.
That's my
I mean,
guess.
that's the beauty of eating nutrient dense food is, and I learned this lesson from a woman who came in here last winter. I have a little workshop here where I am, where I teach canning classes. So I ran 5 sessions last winter, and usually the people who come to those are kind of homesteady. They're not wealthy people, and I always tell people, you'd be shocked to how many house trailers we deliver to. Right, like everyone thinks this is gated community farm,
Right, right, right.
environmentalist stuff. It's not. It's food security. It's nutrient density. It's I'm skeptical of the food system and the government and pharmaceuticals and that's a pretty wide net. But
Yeah.
this woman came up to me at the end, and I guarantee you she was not wealthy. She's like, my husband wouldn't let me buy from you, and I tried and tried and tried. Finally, he agreed, and so we've been with you for 3 months. He came to me with our credit card bill and said, our credit card bill has gone down. Like, why are we buying this more expensive product? You know, and and she's like, it's because we're eating less, right?
Mm.
We
Yeah.
made this, it's not even a decision. Like when you eat high protein, high fat food, nutrient dense, you just aren't hungry. That was the
Yeah.
thing about me with keto. I dropped 35 pounds in 2 to 3 weeks. You would think if I was on a salad diet, like the biggest loser, I'd be
Yeah.
laying in bed, I'd be feeling miserable, it'd be unsustainable. I didn't notice. I went from 195 to 157, and I almost got worried. Like, dude, you better make yourself eat some more because I'm not hungry. My portion sizes are smaller. And when you measure your overall food spend, which people don't, right? The food industry has trained us on cheap units. How much are you paying for this unit?
Right.
Instead of how much am I paying on food?
Yeah.
I did this. I'm working on this little blog post where yesterday I'm doing 2 meals a day. I had 2 eggs with probably an eighth of a pound of sausage, eighth of a pound of cheese for breakfast around 10 o'clock. And then I had my dinner, which was an 8 ounce ribeye, um, and a big salad from my local salad person. So she sells me bags of lettuce, $5 a bag. It was probably a third of that, with another eighth of cheese. I eat anchovies or sardines as well. Anyway, the whole meal costs $23. The average American eats about $23 a day. So it's not expensive. It's expensive if you compare, you know, the cheapest hamburger you can buy to our hamburger. But the other
Right.
thing is food inflation has been so high in meat that, we haven't touched our prices since before COVID. Like we're not dependent on the global situation, right?
Yeah.
Grain being cut off from the Ukraine doesn't have any effect on us. We control our own calves, we control our own feed,
And
right?
I think,
Because we're feeding
yeah,
grass.
and
So,
I think
so
that's
the fact is
incredibly
that food,
important.
meat went up 17% last year. We didn't. So
Yeah.
what used to be maybe a 40 or 50% gap in price now is a lot less. I mean, we sell our sausage, our ground sausage for like 4.80 a pound. Jimmy Dean in Walmart costs 4.90 a pound. Like, so we're now cheaper than grocery store prices in many, many things.
Hmm, interesting. Well, this has been incredibly, like I said, I'm just fascinated by the whole subject. I grew up in Ohio, so I grew up with, farms right right behind my neighborhood, and I know how much the industry has changed in the past generation or two, and so much not for the better. And so it's, and we've all witnessed how just the overall health, like I wouldn't want to put any, I wouldn't feel like putting money towards our healthcare system is a bad investment because we're
Yeah,
not
we're
taking care
we're a
of ourselves.
society that spends the lowest per capita on food in the world and the highest per capita on healthcare in the world, right? And
So it's just
you're
anybody
not
that's,
seeing that healthcare cost when you're buying that box of pasta,
yeah,
right? You're not anticipating that when you're on Medicare, you're going to be spending $200,000 a year of government's money, because you made yourself unhealthy eating that pasta. And that's the hard thing for any human being. As I said, I only got to this at 64. I wish I got it at 40. Um, you know, um,
well,
but
it's never too late. It's
it's
never
never
too
too late. That's the other thing. Remarkably,
late.
like you can fix yourself very, very quickly.
Yeah, which is amazing. Before we wrap up, I always like to ask, is there anything else that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you want to make sure, any particular message you want to leave our listeners with? I mean, I know we've covered a lot of ground today, but if there's
I
anything
mean,
that, like,
know where your food comes from is the most important thing. Know every practice. Yes, I have grass-fed beef. Do you give them antibiotics? Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, well, that's whether I say yes or no, you should not eat that food. That's up to you, right? But if they're giving those animals antibiotics and those animals aren't pasture, what happens to the biology in that pasture? Do you use fertilizers? Do you, same with vegetables, right? Just ask questions and know your farmer. Like it's not some abstract concept anymore. I probably get 25 emails a day of people, customers and non-customers that ask me questions. I make sure I answer them all, right? Because I don't have 100,000 customers. I got a couple of thousand customers, and the whole goal is to have this relationship to understand what am I buying and why, and decommoditize this whole thing.
well, Chris, it was a real pleasure. Like I said, I'm totally inspired, and you've piqued my curiosity even more. So
Well,
I
send
really,
me a picture of your keto plate and your ruck, and I'll track your progress.
that sounds good. Thanks again.
All right, man. Thank you.
Stories from the heart, stories honest and true. The one, the only, the human can